What better place to start the tour of British stuff in Moscow than St. Andrew's Church? What's up guys, and welcome to another video today here in the center of Moscow. This morning I woke up and I saw the weather all grey and rainy, and it reminded me of home. It reminded me of the weather everyone associates with the UK and the weather that I saw almost every day growing up in the UK. So I thought, what a better time today than to make a video about British stuff in Moscow, British history and British heritage, because there's a ton of it, and I guess a lot of it you might not know. What better place to start the tour of British stuff in Moscow than St. Andrew's Church? St. Andrew's Church is one of the only Anglican churches in Russia. There's only 4, and this is the only one in Moscow, and this was built in 1885. And for the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century, it was really the center of the British community here in Moscow. It's named after St. Andrew for 2 symbolic reasons. One of them is St. Andrew is the patron saint of Scotland, and most British people living here during that time were Scottish. They were a main part of the British community in Russia. And the other one is St. Andrew is very linked to Russian heritage, and St. Andrei, as is known here, is a very big part of this country's history, and there's even an order of St. Andrei. Although this is quite a new church in the grand scheme of things, it's had a very checkered and interesting history. In World War II, for example, the British people living here in Moscow set it up as a hospital for wounded Russian soldiers. Of course, Russia and Britain were allies in that war. In 1917, the Bolsheviks took over the church and they confiscated it from the Anglican Church. And actually during the revolution, they even used this tower here as a tower for shooting guns off. It was like a cannon tower. During the Soviet Union in the 20th century, when religion was banned, and of course there was no need for an Anglican church here in Moscow, this building was used for lots and lots of different things. Most notably a dormitory, housing for people working for different embassies here in Moscow, and even a recording studio. Following the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, services resumed here in this church, but the church wasn't fully given back to the Anglican Church and the community here until 1994, when Queen Elizabeth II came to visit, and it was given back to the Anglican Church community. Let's take a look inside. Okay, so I've just been inside the church, and I'd like to tell you my thoughts about it a little bit, because for me it really doesn't feel like an English church. Those walls don't really feel like the churches I've been in back home. And also I noticed on the wall some ikoni, some icons, and that's a very Russian Orthodox thing. It's not a very Anglican thing. So it's interesting that they've incorporated something Russian in this Anglican church here in Moscow. But overall, I think it's great that we have a British, an Anglican church, a Church of England church here in the centre of Moscow. It's great. Scotsman Jakob Bruce is one of the best known British people to serve Russia. He was born and raised here to Scottish parents in the 16th century in what's known as the German Quarter of Russia. The German Quarter of Russia was where all foreign people, all European people lived here, because in Russian language back then, every foreigner was just called German. Jakob Bruce became a very close friend of Tsar Peter the Great, and became a great military leader for Russia. He helped the fights in the wars in Crimea and the wars in Sweden, expanding Russia beyond its borders, and was a great reformer of the artillery of the Russian army. Street here, Brusov Perulak, Bruce Street, is named after him. This building right behind me here, called Dom Brusov, Bruce House, was built in the 1770s by Jakob Bruce's great nephew, who was also called Jacob. He was also a big part of Russian society, and he was the Moscow commander-in-chief. So yeah, the Bruce dynasty, honoured with this street and this house, were great important British people, Scottish people, serving Russia in the 16th and 17th centuries. Brusov Perulak is a really important street in Moscow, as it's one of the ones which comes off the main street, Tverskaya Ulitsa, and there's a huge grand entrance at the start of it with a huge arch, and it goes all the way down to this house here, which is quite far really. In the year 1780, English entrepreneur and engineer Michael Maddux built the first public theatre here in Moscow. It was a stone theatre right here on this spot on Petrovka Street, and the theatre was called Petrovsky Theatre. Unfortunately, in 1805, this theatre burned down, and right here in its spot on Theatre Square, Teatralnaya Ploshchad, is the most popular, the most famous theatre in the whole of Russia, Bolshoi Theatre. So yeah, right here on its place was a theatre built by an Englishman. Right next to Bolshoi Theatre nowadays is this building, Zoom. However, right here on this spot was another British building, a Scottish department store. It was built here around the same time as the original theatre here, and it originally sold women's hats and then turned into fashion and became a department store itself. Unfortunately, that building also burned down and was replaced by the building we see today, Centralny Uniwersalny Magazine, Zoom. So yeah, here and here were both British buildings, and they were both burned down, and today they're two of the most iconic buildings in the whole of Moscow. There are many other buildings in Moscow built by Brits, and one of the most prominent Brits was William Walcott. William Walcott is known for his Art Nouveau style, and most famously designed this building, Hotel Metropole. Many of his other buildings are now embassies for different nations in Moscow. British influence can sometimes be found where you least expect it, and in this case, somewhere that I least expected was the Kremlin. Here behind me we see Spasskaya Tower. This is a very old tower, but in the 17th century it gained the Green Dome. You can see the Green Dome on the top right here, home was designed by Scotsman Christopher Holloway, who was working for the Tsar at the time, and now it's one of the most iconic pictures in the whole of Moscow, and it was designed by a Brit. This building behind me right here is the oldest English building in Moscow, the Old English Court. In 1553, some English merchants were trying to get to China. They wanted to find a northern route above Russia, and they got stuck, they got lost, and ended up heading down to Moscow. When they arrived in Moscow, they met the Tsar, and the Tsar of Russia at that time was looking to create relationships with other European countries, and decided to welcome these English merchants into Moscow and let them establish a base here to do trading between England and Russia. And they established the Old Muscovy Company, and it was based right here. This building was built in 1556. This building was a sales office, it was a warehouse for storage, and it was also a place for the people who worked here, the British people working here in Moscow, to sleep. It was like their accommodation too. The first English company here in Moscow that was based here lasted until 1649, when in the United Kingdom Charles I was beheaded, and Alexei I, the Tsar of Russia, considered that to be unacceptable. He saw it as a threat against Tsars and kings all over Britain, and he kicked all the British people out. In 1994, over 400 years after it was first built, this building was turned into a museum. Queen Elizabeth II came from the UK to open it, and the opening ceremony, and she put up a plaque right here which commemorates the relationship between England and Russia, between, at the time, Elizabeth I and the Tsar Ivan the Terrible, and the relationship Russia and England has today. The museum is dedicated to the history of trade and diplomatic relations between England, Great Britain and Russia, and it also has an exhibition on the life of these English merchants in Moscow in the 16th and 17th centuries. As you can see, it's open every single day of the week apart from Monday, and it's well worth a trip. This 19th century house was originally the home of Gustav Liszt, a wealthy Moscow industrialist. It was transferred to the British government in 1927 and was used as the embassy. The British embassy moved to modern new premises in 2002, but the old building remains the official residence of the British ambassador in Moscow. It's my favourite building in the city. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and if you got this far, I presume you liked it, so please press the thumbs up down below. If you know anything else about British stuff in Moscow, please write a comment down there. And if you want to see more content from me about Moscow and other cities in Russia, please subscribe. Thank you and goodbye.